At exactly 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, the emergency department at St. Vincent's Hospital in Chicago received a patient who should not have existed. He had no identification, no phone, no wallet. His clothes were unfamiliar but not theatrical, just a plain gray jacket, worn leather boots, and a wristwatch that had stopped ticking decades ago. What made the nurses pause was not how he looked, but what he said when they asked his name. He answered calmly. He gave a full name, a birth date, and then added something no one asked for. He said the year he came from. He said it without drama, without hesitation, as if stating the weather. He said he was born in 2084. He said he had traveled backward by accident. And then he asked a question that made the room go silent. He asked if the Atlantic coastal cities were still above water. At first, everyone assumed confusion, shock, a neurological episode. That's what hospitals are trained to see. But confusion doesn't explain why his vital signs were perfectly normal. It doesn't explain why he recognized medical equipment that hadn't been publicly documented yet. And it definitely doesn't explain how he described, in precise detail, a bridge collapse that would not happen for another 11 months, down to the minute. When doctors pulled his blood work, nothing looked abnormal, human, ordinary. But when they ran his DNA through a genealogy database, something impossible appeared. His genetic markers didn't match any living population cluster, not European, not Asian, not African. The algorithm flagged him as statistically improbable, not impossible, improbable, as if he came from a future branch of humanity that hadn't formed yet. The official report would later say the patient suffered from delusions. The internal memo would say time-related psychosis. The public would never hear about it. But 3 people in that hospital knew something had gone wrong with reality that night. One was an ER nurse who noticed the patient kept checking exits as if listening for something only he could hear. Another was a resident physician who recorded the conversation on a phone she never turned in. And the third was the patient himself, who kept repeating the same sentence under his breath while staring at the ceiling. This isn't the right year. I missed the correction window. Most people believe time travel is a fantasy because textbooks say it is, because movies exaggerate it, because science classes teach time as a straight line. But textbooks don't talk about the experiments that were quietly conducted in the late 20th century, long before quantum mechanics became a buzzword. They don't talk about the classified research into temporal displacement that emerged from Cold War physics programs. They don't talk about how time was never treated as a line by serious physicists, but as a field, a fabric, something that could bend under pressure. In 1971, 2 atomic clocks were placed on commercial airplanes and flown in opposite directions around the Earth. When they returned, they were out of sync with the clocks left on the ground. Not broken, not malfunctioning, offset. Time had passed differently for them. This was not theory, this was measurement. A measurable distortion of time caused by velocity and gravity, exactly as Einstein predicted. That experiment is often taught as a curiosity. What textbooks don't mention is what came next. Private research labs began asking a different question. If time could slow down, could it also shift sideways? Could it loop? Could it fracture? In the early 2000s, physicists studying quantum tunneling noticed particles appearing in detectors before they should have arrived. Not faster than light, earlier than causality allowed. The particles behaved as if they had already completed the journey before it started. The results were dismissed as statistical noise until they weren't. Around the same time, anthropologists began noticing something strange in the archaeological record. Certain artifacts appeared where they should not exist. Tools made with metallurgy too advanced for their era. Astronomical alignments that required centuries of observation appearing suddenly, fully formed. Writing systems that emerged without gradual evolution, as if knowledge had been dropped into the past, already complete. In central Turkey, Stone pillars weighing more than 20 tons were erected by hunter-gatherers 11,000 years ago. No agriculture, no permanent settlements, no surplus food economy. Yet the site required planning, geometry, and astronomical knowledge. When researchers asked how such coordination was possible, the answers grew vague. In Peru, skulls were found with surgical openings that showed bone regrowth. Successful brain surgery performed thousands of years before modern medicine. In India, ancient texts described weapons that matched the effects of radiation exposure. In Egypt, structures were aligned to stars that no longer occupy the same position due to axial precession, suggesting the knowledge came from a different epoch entirely. Across continents, myths told the same story. Visitors who arrived suddenly, teachers who brought knowledge, warnings about future disasters, and then disappearances, always disappearances. The conventional explanation is diffusion or coincidence, but coincidence does not repeat with mathematical precision, and diffusion does not explain how isolated cultures, separated by oceans, encoded the same astronomical constants into stone. Something was moving through time, not gods, not aliens, something human, something that understood the structure of time well enough to step through it imperfectly. The patient in Chicago knew this. That's why he panicked when he realized where he was. He knew that time travel didn't work like the movies. You didn't choose a date and arrive cleanly. You slid along probability gradients. You fell into nearby temporal layers, sometimes too early, sometimes too late, sometimes into unstable zones where history hadn't settled yet. He said time was not a river, but a delta, multiple channels splitting and rejoining. Most people lived inside the main current, never noticing the smaller streams, but advanced systems could enter those side channels, not to change history, to survive it. According to him, his world did not invent time travel to explore the past. They invented it to escape the future. In his timeline, coastal cities were abandoned by 2093, not flooded all at once, slowly. Insurance markets collapsed first, then infrastructure, then relocation. Climate models had been accurate, but political systems had not been adaptive. Entire populations moved inland, governments fractured, data centers failed. The world didn't end. It reorganized brutally. Time displacement technology was developed as an emergency measure, not to fix the past, to preserve knowledge, to send information backward before systems collapsed. Human memory, he said, was too fragile. Digital storage depended on energy grids, but time itself could store information if you knew how to write into it. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was part of a stabilization team. His job was to monitor temporal anchors, fixed points where interference had already occurred, places where anomalies clustered, the pyramids, Göbekli Tepe, the Indus Valley. Those weren't mysteries, they were scars, evidence of previous corrections. He said the biggest mistake humanity ever made was assuming progress was linear. It wasn't. It was cyclical. Build, collapse, rediscover. Each cycle inherited fragments from the last. Language, mathematics, astronomy, and occasionally, people. The haunting part wasn't that time travel existed. It was that it had already happened many times, and it never went cleanly. He said history books were wrong because history itself had been edited repeatedly, not by a single authority, but by desperate civilizations trying to warn their predecessors. Most attempts failed. Messages distorted into myth. Technologies misunderstood as magic. Teachers remembered as gods. That's why every culture had flood stories. Not because one flood happened, but because multiple collapses had occurred across cycles. Sea levels rose, ice melted, cities drowned, knowledge retreated inland. Survivors tried to remember what mattered. Most failed. The nurse asked him why he couldn't just go back. He smiled sadly. He said the window closes once you arrive. The act of observation collapses the pathway. Like quantum measurement, once you're here, you're anchored. By morning, federal agents arrived. Not because the hospital reported him, because he triggered a sensor. He had activated something simply by existing out of time. His body carried temporal noise, a signature that certain systems were trained to detect. The official story would say he was transferred to a psychiatric facility. The nurse would later quit her job, and the patient would vanish from all records within 48 hours. But the timeline didn't reset, because something else had already changed. 3 months after the incident, an archivist in Alexandria, digitizing a previously untranslated papyrus, noticed a line that had never been noticed before. The ink composition was anomalous, newer than the surrounding text by centuries. The line described a man who fell from tomorrow, bearing warnings of water and fire. No historian could explain how that ink ended up there. Around the same time, a physicist in Kyoto, working on quantum decoherence, published a paper showing that information could theoretically travel backward in time under specific conditions without violating causality, as long as it did not include explicit instructions. Warnings were allowed, predictions were not. The universe, it seemed, tolerated hints but resisted commands. Across the world, small changes accumulated. A city delayed a coastal development project. An engineer reinforced a bridge. A climate model gained funding that had previously been denied. None of it traced back to a single source. But together, they shifted probabilities. This was the pattern behind the pattern. Time travel didn't overwrite history. It nudged it, gently, repeatedly, like tapping a spinning top to keep it upright just a little longer. The forbidden explanation was not that time travel broke reality, but that reality had always been flexible. Human consciousness moved through time in one direction, but information did not have to. The universe was less like a story and more like a memory, constantly being recalled, revised, and reinforced. The twist came from the audio recording. Near the end, just before the agents arrived, the patient said something that no one noticed at first. He said, "If you're hearing this, it means we failed earlier than expected." He wasn't talking to the nurse. He was talking to the future, or the past, or both. He said there were limits. You couldn't save everyone. You couldn't prevent collapse entirely. The goal was not survival of civilizations, but survival of wisdom. To make sure that when the next cycle began, humanity would not start from zero again. The warning was subtle but clear. The forces that erased previous civilizations were not gone. Climate instability, resource depletion, social fragmentation, technological acceleration without ethical grounding, faster this time. But the hopeful part was this: each cycle learned a little more. Each collapse preserved a little more. Stone monuments lasted longer than cities. Mathematics outlasted empires. Stories outlived languages. And now, humanity had begun to understand time itself. The final question the patient asked was never recorded in the official transcript. It only exists in the leaked audio. He asked, very quietly, if we can send warnings back, why haven't we received clearer ones? Then he answered himself, because we're the first generation capable of hearing them. The implication was staggering. All those myths, all those anomalies, all those unexplained gaps in history, they weren't evidence of lost gods or aliens. They were echoes, messages from ourselves, from futures that collapsed before they could finish speaking. The happy ending, if it could be called that, was not a salvation. It was a chance, a narrow one, a chance to recognize the pattern before the next correction was needed, a chance to preserve more than fragments, a chance to become the ancestors who didn't vanish. Somewhere in a future that still hasn't settled, someone is watching probability curves shift, watching floods delay, watching cities adapt instead of retreat, watching history bend just enough to matter. And somewhere in the present, someone is listening to a story about a man who fell out of time, wondering if it's fiction or warning. The question that remains is simple and terrifying. If time travelers have already been here trying to save us, what does it say about our future that they felt the need to come at all? Some questions don't come with clear answers. Some stories don't end. They linger. What matters is not what we think we know, but what we're willing to question. If this story made you pause, reflect, or look at the world a little differently, then it's done its job. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy thoughtful stories grounded in reality, curiosity, and careful analysis, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.